Does anyone else want to speak on how they use PAR, or anybody have anything unique that they do? Or yes, Dave.
Yes, Scott, we at Shadler-Yesco in Pennsylvania have this thing called SYDU, Shadler-Yesco Distribution University, where we have a number of our employees that come, and we just want to help them become better business people. It's not a management training program or anything. And we just had it last week, where we took our income statement and the percentages and laid right next to it the PAR, typical PAR distributor, and their goal was to develop an income statement after a 3-hour class, develop an income statement to get our results closer to the PAR results, less to we're low to PAR as far as net income. So it's at the hourly employee level that we use it as well.
Good, good. I really appreciate that. Anyone else? Or we'll move on. All right, well, thank you. I do appreciate that. And I also did some phone interviews with a couple industry members. For instance, many of you probably know Mo Barcima, and she said she wanted to relay some key points. She shares the information with her bank and with her accountants, and she says that has become a very important piece to her, especially in her banking relationships, showing them and giving them feel-good pieces, knowing where the industry is relative to her company. And she does use it for monthly and quarterly goals, and she really likes tracking the historical performance of the industry relative to her company. And she has a quote down here. It's important to have a tool in our industry that we can use to compare ourselves and better understand our businesses. She feels like that she is very passionate in that regard, and she wanted to relay that. And also, going here with Dave, Jim LaRocca of his company also just had some points there. Looks for areas where they've improved or worsened. Distributes the full reports to the executive team and abridged, just as Dave was mentioning. And he also mentioned that he uses the interactive tools so that you can do customized data cuts. And his quote was, "It's a great tool and a cheap way to access all of this information." So he felt like it's extremely valuable. So now we were getting to the funner part. Okay, so we're getting to the much funner part of the data. So try to brace yourself. It's going to be fun. And I'd really like it to be interactive as going through a bunch of charts and graphs can be, okay? I understand. I mean, I do understand. At times I am in your guys' chairs listening to accountants tell me about financial statements and other things. I totally get it. But I promise you, what we're going to do, our intent here, is we want to look at what are the benchmarks, how have the trends developed, and what can we learn about the differentiation between the most profitable and the least profitable. Now, this is sales volume. This is the first slide, and I'm mostly using it as just the kickstart slide to help us understand how these slides are going to be relayed. First, I don't know if my pointer will work. Yes. Okay. This is the all respondents. This is going to be the median, so 50%, we're right here. The most profitable companies, we look at return on assets performance. The reason that we look at return on assets is because that allows us to blend the income statement with the balance sheet. All that is net profit over your total assets. It's a simple metric. It's very effective, and it allows us to blend the two financial statements. So that's why we like return on assets as our key metric. So we've defined those who are in the top quartile of profitability of return on assets as the most profitable, or the elite status. I may use that phrasing. And then those in the bottom quartile were the least profitable. Now the trend lines over here, that indicates all respondents. So that is going to go with the all respondents. Now, what I want to just point out on this slide alone is these lines. I'm not saying that was what the industry did here. that is going to be respondent based. So as some members come in and out of the sample, we have had some fluctuation there. And we know that because when we look at the sales volume trend or the sales change trend, it does not mirror this. So the sales change trend is going to be a better indicator for what has happened from a trends perspective. Any questions on how we've laid this out? All right, I'm looking for some interactivity. So, all right, return on assets. As we look here, now as we may expect, of course, this is our key metric, and there is a lot of difference between the most profitable and the least profitable. Makes total sense since this is the indicator upon which we've gauged it. What I do like from a trends perspective is it has improved. Generally, the slide is going up, so that's a good process. And so there's really not much to say there. That just kind of acclimates us a little more into the slides. Now we look at profit margin. Somewhat mirroring the slide before when we talked about return on assets, profit margin is just simply after all the expenses are gone, but prior to taxes, how much is left for every $100 that came in the door. So for every $100 of sales, how much is left? And when we look here, we can see how that trend is also going up. Now, I'm going to go to a different type of slide here. And this is a scatter diagram of the individual data points. Okay, now I'm going to spend a little time here helping us to understand, because I swear as we go forward, you're going to become experts at reading these slides. Okay, so if you don't think this is fun, I don't know what to tell you. All right, so what we've done, this axis here means nothing. It's just completely random. It's a spacer. Okay, nothing means anything here. What we want to look at is the vertical and the colors. Okay, if you're in green, you're an elite participant. If you're in blue, you're in the bottom quartile. Okay, so what this allows us to do, does anyone take a guess at how clear this is? And the blue line here is the median for the metric. So this is the median profit margin. Anyone want to take a stab? Okay, I'll kick us off, and then you can pick it up next. All right, so what we have, the green are indicating, as you can see, these who are in the top half of companies were the ones able to achieve elite status. No one below the line was able to achieve elite status. Okay, so no matter what they did with their asset productivity, those in the bottom half of profitability were not able to become top performers. That's what we can see with this slide. So there is clear differentiation, which from a statistical point of view shows us that there is a very strong correlation, as you may expect, between profitability and being a top firm, being in that top quartile. And as we'll see further, when we get to the asset side, there's not nearly as much variance or deviation among the assets. Now, one other thing I want to show you is how relatively confined the profits are. So you can see, in general, everything is right here in this nice band. That shows us that there's a lot of data comparability amongst the respondents. So now we'll look at asset turnover. Asset turnover and profit margin are what drive us to the return on assets. It's just a combination, the product of those two metrics. So asset turns, what do we notice here in the bars? Yes, that's right. They're very close. There's not a lot of variance. So what might we expect when we go to the next slide?
More variance.
Okay. Do we think it'll be segmented? Are we expecting segmentation? That's right. I'm kind of cheating because I know what's on the next slide. But yes. So now we can see this slide. So when we look at asset turnover, which asset turnover, I should explain, is just sales over top of assets. So that's it. It's a simple metric. I like simple. And especially when we get complex with data analysis, we need the ingredients to start simple so that we don't have a further compounding issue. So what we see here is greens. Yes, greens tend to be up here. It's heavier weighted up here. There's more greens than blues up there and more blues down below, I guess. And I should also point out, I'm sorry I failed to earlier, the gray is the middle range. So those in that middle 50% are all the grays. So you can see those interspersed. So this tells us that asset turnover is not really the driver. And what we use asset turnover to tell us is, are you asset heavy? Assets is what you're using what's tied up in order to run your business. We look at it as that is what you're volunteering, that's what you have to run your business is an asset. And how productively are you using those assets? In terms of this individual metric, we're seeing it's pretty well interspersed and not the key driver to profitability. Financial leverage. This is essentially risk. The more leveraged you are, just like when you own your home and you've put no money down versus 20% down, the person with no money invested is more heavily leveraged than the others. That's great. It's great to be leveraged when times are good. It's just when there's a downturn, as we saw with the whole housing crisis a few years back, being leveraged isn't so advisable. So everything here is relative, but when we look at the leverage or the amount of risk, we can see that the least profitable are more heavily leveraged than are the others. And as by now I'm sure that you're somewhat of an expert, we can see that there are more greens. And when you look up here, most of the very, very high values, those highly leveraged, are in the blue. And that's not exactly causal. I'm not saying that the leverage is what's causing that. In fact, I'd probably say it's the other. It's going to be the lack of profits. The lesser profits are driving them to a heavily leveraged position. Taking a couple net losses in a couple years can erode your equity, which then affects your leverage position. But we can see, and one more piece, we can see that it's more scattered. Leverage just does that because you're talking net worth, which can go from sizable down to hardly anything. In fact, you could have net worth of $1 or negative $1, and that would work, which would give you an infinitely large number here. So return on net worth, which goes with the DuPont model and is the key ingredient. I know many have spoken on return on net worth and how that's so important for an industry, and it is. We see a lot of segmentation. So what would we expect on the next slide? The greens up top, the blues on the bottom, right? And that's right. And so just as we expect. However, as I've pointed out, this is mostly because of profits. Because profits is the component here driving this trend as well. Here's our sales growth. It's kind of an interesting looking slide. I do want to point out that it's still growth. It's still above zero. I see that it's going down. It's just less growth over the past few years. And it also shows us that the most profitable companies are achieving more growth than the least profitable. However, this slide shows us that really growth is not a driver. We can see down here, companies that had sales declines still were in our elite status category. They still achieved top profits related to their assets. And some that had excessive growth beyond everyone else still were in the lower quartile. So that shows us that sales growth itself wasn't the driver. Yes, there are more greens up here than down here, and vice versa with the blues, but it wasn't the driver, which tells us that sales growth isn't going to cure everything. I know many times we fall into a habit of thinking, well, if we just get more sales, it would take care of it. If we just grow faster. But that's not necessarily, according to the data, and I only speak to the data, according to the data that for 2014, that was not the case. That sales growth was the driver.